Hello, everyone. I am Ann Molesky, and I am here with my friend Victoria Bowler, and we are back for another episode of Teaching Music Tomorrow. Kind of like a part 2 of what is a 3-part series. Can we go within a series? Can we go ahead and just say that? Yeah, so today we are talking all about rhythmic arranging. I almost said reading, but rhythmic arranging level 2, which is something that we're kind of figuring out what those levels mean as we go, because as we mentioned on last week's podcast, we don't talk about these things before we get on and record, because what happens is we start talking and we're like, oh, we should have recorded it. So we try to maintain some mystery in the relationship, if you will. So if you have not listened to last week's episode, it would be a good time to go back and listen or watch that if you would like, because we did talk about sort of some entry ways into rhythmic arranging for your students, mainly some ostinati type stuff and like some B section type stuff. And I'm willing to bet we're going to build off of that today, or at least I plan to. I'm sure Victoria does as well. Anything else you want to add, V, before we dive right in?
Yeah, I was thinking about the last conversation we had about this, and I was just kind of reflecting on and we can dive into this, or we can decide not to and just go straight into your activity. But I was thinking about how you are thinking of arranging, and how in your conversations about it, you seem to tie it a lot to form. So maybe, and then ostinato is like a layer of texture, if you will. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because at the end, last time we talked a little bit about the difference between arranging and improvisation in my mind. But I think you also have your own way of thinking about this that, again, is very tied to the actual structure of the work. And that's what you were doing last class, where we talked about how when you zoom out, the arrangement is that there's a B section and we're moving between different form sections of the song. So I don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
Yes, and so when I think about arranging, I'm thinking about the way songs exist in my classroom, which is predominantly a singing classroom, singing first always. So if you envision like the music is a single line of sung text usually, right? And so the arranging would be to take like that 16 beat, again, usually song, and if we have those 16 beats out on a horizontal plane, right? So then we're adding maybe some layers on the top or on the bottom, maybe a couple lines top and bottom, wherever you want to put them. So instead of that single line, it's like 2 to 4-ish. So that's one level. Okay. So we can do it that way, and or we can have our 16 beat song. We can add an introduction. We can add a B section. We can add a B section plus returning to the chorus, or like the known 16 beat song, and then a C section and turn it into a rondo and do all that kind of stuff, and then have a coda at the end. I mean, there's lots of different opportunities there. So the idea for me is that arranging just means we're adding to. So does that mean we're adding to vertically? Maybe. Does that mean we're adding to horizontally? Sure. So like if my kids, playing off of last week's episode, want to do apple tree, and they decide that their rhythm is going to be tree, apple. Maybe that's just the introduction to our game. So they'll all go tree, apple,
Right.
apple, tree, and then play the game. And then tree, apple comes back so that like the next set of trees can get in position. And then we sing and play again. And then tree, apple. And then the next set of trees gets into position and we play again. So I think arranging can exist both kind of in that, if you're, again, thinking about a visual piece of music, in that sort of vertical plane as well as horizontally. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And something that I like about it is that when we think about an arrangement, often what we go to, or what my mind goes to, is like a wind band arrangement of a folk song, or like a choral arrangement of a folk song, where you have like the main melody that kind of stays the same, and then we're adding things, we're kind of breaking it apart, and we're putting a section in here and there, and in one sense, that's very simple, because the musical material already exists. We're just kind of choosing the structure and the layers on top of it. On the other hand, I think that for a lot of us, if someone says, could you please create an arrangement of apple tree? That could feel very like kind of hairy scary, right? Unless you've had specific training in how to create arrangements for your classroom. But what you are saying is if we are making a musical choice about the way this piece of music lives in the classroom, any musical choice or many musical choices could fall under the category of arranging. And I completely agree with that. I think when I think of arranging, I am often looking at kind of a smaller piece, not every time, but often when I say arranging, I mean something like arranging rhythmic building blocks, right? Where I give you these pieces and you reorder the pieces. And what you are adding to this, and again, I completely believe this approach to arranging is like very manageable and is also true arranging. It's just that normally when I use the word, I'm using it in a little bit of a smaller context, and you are using it often, like in these activities, you are using it when you are backing up and looking at bigger structural things. So I think that's one, very approachable, and I also think it's probably nice to talk about when we use these words, improvisation, arranging, composition, there are 30 million things that we could be talking about, which is why you suggested that we break this down into different levels, you know?
Yeah, and I think the idea too is, I wrote it down last week. So what you said about improvisation is simply or not so simply like being asked to think about it at the same time as you're being asked to execute it, which I know you said is attributed to somebody different, but regardless, I think that might feel oversimplistic to people, but really when you distill it, but it's not, because when you distill it down to what is it really, it's being asked to think about something and execute it at the same time, whether we're talking about tas and titis or we're talking about like a jazz solo over a chord progression, right? Like it's the same thing. It has a lot of meaning, a lot of layers of meaning, no matter what. And I think what you said too about when we talk about arranging, it can be like this bigger formal thing. It can be all these different levels and layers, like I talked about, kind of on that vertical plane, or it can be simply going tree, apple, here's 2 words, here's 4 beat blanks, what does it look like, right? So again, distilling it down into its simplest part, I think, can be really, really useful and make it accessible for both us as teachers and for our kids too. And it makes it so that it doesn't rely on notation, which is something that we talked about a little bit last time, right?
Yeah, we talked about talking about it.
Yeah. Because it feels like a different topic, which often happens as we start talking about things. But the idea that it can happen kind of like pre-notation versus post-notation, depending on what type of notation you're using, right? So pre-formal Western notation type of stuff, or post-formal Western notation. But anyway, I went first last time, so you get to go first this time.
Okay, so I am kind of breaking our rules for this, because this is rhythm arranging level 2, and I'm going to do rhythm arranging level 1 again, this time older beginners. And actually, as I'm saying this, I wonder if I've shared this activity already. And if I have, then great, we'll talk about it with a different lens. And if I haven't, then fabulous as well. Okay, and I have something here, and this is actually a good tie-in, because this whole activity would happen with 0 notation on the board. I think at all, unless I would change my mind like in the moment kind of thing. Okay, so I have here something, and when I get the camera to focus, what does it look like to you, Anne?
It's a rock.
It is a rock. What do I have
stone.
Here? Yeah.
Another stone.
Ooh, that's kind of cool. You know what I can do? If I were my father-in-law, I would show you how I can juggle, but I'm not going to do that because I cannot juggle. But what I can do, yeah, that's right. I can make all sorts of sounds with these, like, or I could. Oh, that's kind of interesting. This is a song from the Akan people in Ghana. This is a children's game that you are probably familiar with, but it is a stone passing game. And the idea is everyone is seated in a circle, and we are going to pass the rock from one person to another while we are singing. Obwasimisa, nana, Obwasimisa. Obwasimisa, nana, Obwasimisa. And this is in a steady beat. It is sourced from Let Your Voice Be Heard is the name of the book. And in the book, they talk about how this is not hot potato. You're not passing the rock as fast as you can. You're passing it to a steady beat. So that steady beat is really important in the game because it's what keeps everyone together. Because as we start adding more and more rocks to the circle, can I tell you something that is going to sound kind of different to well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but kind of a little bit different to us, is if you are doing this passing game and you pass it to someone and they don't pick it up, and there's a mistake, it doesn't matter if it's the fault of the person who passed it or the person who picked it up. Both of you are out. Whoa, that feels kind of different to me from what I'm used to doing in like a passing game and whose fault it is and stuff like that. Okay, so that's a whole conversation there. But the idea is we have this passing game. Obwasimisa, nana, Obwasimisa. Obwasimisa, nana, Obwasimisa. That's a steady beat, but we could also take the rhythm of the words and put them in our hands while we sing or while we think the words in our head. Obwasimisa, nana, Obwasimisa. Obwasimisa, nana, Obwasimisa. I bet that we could have half the class play the game with the steady beat, and we could also have half the class play the rhythm of the words just clapping. Or maybe this is something that we transfer to other rocks. Right? You have to be careful. Don't crush your fingers. Or maybe this is something that we're doing with rhythm sticks or with tubanos or something. But the idea is there is the steady beat right here and there's the rhythm of the words right here. Already, this is an opportunity for an arrangement right there because at this point we have the game, we have the song, and we have the rhythm of the words. Well, the game could be everyone sings and plays the game. The game could also be half the class plays the game while half the class sings the song. This song could be singing and clapping the rhythm of the words. The song could be inner hearing and just clapping the rhythm of the words. And then even with the rhythm of the words, and we could be playing the rhythm of the words on body percussion that we choose. We could be doing it on unpitched percussion. We could find another pair of rocks to play it with, all of that. So even just with this, deciding, and this is going back to your commentary on the structure being the arrangement itself, even just taking something that is the rhythm, the beat, the song, and how we want to order that together, that's a whole opportunity for arranging. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of the first pathway that we can do. But what I like to do instead is, or like as another option is, in small groups of maybe 4, maybe 5, depends on your older beginners and how we're going to handle group work. Could you come up with another combination of picking up and passing? So maybe you decide to pick it up, toss, catch it, put it down. Pick it up, toss it, catch it, put it down. Or maybe you decide to tap it on the floor in front of you. Maybe you go tap, 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 pass. Tap, 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 pass. Or maybe you decide to, you do your right knee, then your left knee, then the floor, then the person next to you. Right, left, floor, person next to you. So with this, we are going to an arrangement, but it's the group arranging the steady beat of the game. And the criteria for this is everyone in the group needs to be able to play this game successfully, and it needs to be a steady beat. So now I've added kind of another like inception, like an arrangement within the arrangement, because then we can take all of the stuff that we have been doing previously with the rhythm of the words and the game and the song. And now we have this other layer of the arranged steady beat passing game. So then when students share this out, what I like to do is have half the class do their steady beat arrangement all together. So it just depends on the size of your class, but you might have like 3 groups doing their passing game while the rest of the class is watching and clapping the rhythm of the words. So now again, we still have this rhythm versus beat stuff going on. And then you switch jobs. This half of the room will have, 3, 4 groups or so doing their version of the passing game while this half of the room is watching. And then we can choose if we want to have people share individually, because this is not an individual sharing or like an individual group sharing. It's half the class in groups, half the class in groups. Then we can do this in a rondo form. We could do this with like layered ostinati, and then everyone sings the song at the end. Like there are a million gazillion ways to slice and dice this. So hopefully that's not too open-ended. But the idea is we have the passing game. We are arranging the passing game steady beat for a different version of the passing game, and then kind of combining that with the rhythm of the words in whatever way we want to. So not to give a commentary on my own thing, but this is also going back to some of the stuff that you were saying about in arranging. We can sometimes talk about what is the student's part that they are arranging and what's the teacher's part that we are arranging. And this is, like your activity will be, I'm sure, this is like kind of a combination of both. So that's that.
Yeah. So the ending picture, so the beginning picture is just singing the song, but singing the song, playing the passing game with a steady beat. The next step is giving them, and then kind of fast forward up to the very end, you have the class in half, small groups doing their own version of the passing game, and then the other half was singing. Is that what you said?
They're singing and doing they're singing and doing the rhythm of the words. So rhythm versus beat.
And then switch. Yeah, awesome. And what I love about this for older beginners is it gives them a chance to obviously practice steady beat and then practice rhythm versus beat, but they're arranging something that doesn't, especially like if this was the beginning of the year with whatever grade and they've never had you as their music teacher, like they're having the opportunity to have some choice and do some musical arranging, but it's a foundational enough skill that their success rate is going to be much, much higher than if it was something that you were trying to do with like the rhythm of the words, right? Like, so the choice was coming with the beat because that stays consistent and is that big foundational pull versus the words, which aren't like crazy complex in this song, but still would feel more intimidating to those kids to manipulate that, right? So I love that. I love that for older beginners.
And that's why I'm calling it level 1, because all you're doing is changing how you're playing the beat. Right. Goodness gracious, like what a simple task. But when you get into this activity, you're going to come up against what is a consistent motion that stays the same the whole entire time, right? And what is like getting fancy and kind of finding subdivisions and things like that. So making it narrow is its own challenge for these students. But like you said, it's accessible enough and it's the foundation of everything else that we're going to build off of, so it's worth instead of what we could do is just like pat your knees. That's what I'm trying to get away from. I'm trying to get away from like the spider fingers on your knees that I would do with young students. And what's a way that we can make it like a little bit more physical, a little bit more student choice, a little bit more like social interaction and along those lines.
Yeah, like tossing rocks in the air sounds way cooler than itsy bitsy spider on your knees, right? Like there's a little bit more buy-in there than what there would be otherwise. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Well, mine is still going back to our good old friend apple tree. I'm going to be real boring and build upon what we talked about, and I feel like I've already hinted at it. So this is probably going to be fast and furious, but that's okay. So last week I talked about, and as I did at the beginning of today's episode, taking like a four beat blanks or 16 beat blanks or just taking 4 beat blanks and putting a repeat sign at the end, or 4 or 8, excuse me, not 16. And giving students the opportunity to change ta, toddy, ta, tt, or just apple and tree. So for the sake of today, let's just use apple and tree. So Victoria, be my echo. Tree, apple, tree, apple.
Tree, apple, tree, apple.
Apple, tree, apple, tree.
Apple, tree, apple, tree.
Apple, tree, tree, apple.
Apple, tree, tree, apple.
Tree, 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 apple.
Tree, 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 apple.
Yeah, so be my echo, but this time do something different. And again, notice that students have the tendency to, if you say apple, logo, tree, apple. I mentioned that last time, but don't do that. Just do something totally different. You can use as many trees, as many apples as you want, as long as it's not the same as mine. Okay? Ready, set, and here I go. Tree, apple, apple, tree.
Tree, 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 tree.
Apple, 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 tree.
Apple, 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 apple.
Apple, tree, apple, apple.
Tree, tree, apple, apple.
Tree, tree, apple, tree.
Apple, apple, tree, tree.
Cool. So can you kind of think of one that you want to hold on to?
Apple, apple, tree, tree.
Great. Let's do it twice together. Ready, set, and here we go.
Apple, apple, tree, tree. apple, apple, tree, tree.
Yeah, this is probably a pain to edit because of the lag. I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So let's hang on to that one. And what I want you to do is I want that to be our introduction. And we're going to just speak it. And then we're going to sing apple tree. And then I want you to take that apple, apple, tree, tree. And if you can either clap it or pat, do you want the word apple to be claps or do you want the word apples to be pats?
I would like them, please, to be pats.
Okay, so do you want them to be pats together or do you want separate pats?
I will need separate pats.
Separate pats, which is probably a good choice. Okay, so we have apple, apple, tree, and you want to put the trees there. Okay, tree, tree. So we have apple, apple, tree, tree, apple, apple, tree, tree. Wonderful. Would you like to do that with the words or without the words?
I want to think the words in my head.
You want to think the words in your head. That's a
Is that what you're asking?
wonderful choice. Yes, I'm asking if you want to say the words out loud or if you want to put them in your brain. Awesome. Yep. Ready, set, and here we go. Beautiful. So that is just an example of if Victoria was one of like, again, however many pairs or however many small groups you do in your class. That can be their interlude or that B section that we talked about. So if we have the introduction and we decided as a class, we're going to vote on apple, apple, tree, tree. We're all going to go apple, apple, tree, tree, apple, apple, tree, tree. Apple tree, sing and play the game. And then maybe, again, doing the half class thing, we read each other's brains today, half class thing where half the class is probably playing the game and the other half is in their small groups. They're like the B section. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so like Victoria's apple, apple with the pats and the claps would go first. Okay. And then we go back to the apple tree. Then the second group or second pair or whatever is going to do theirs, go back to the game. And each time, however you play apple tree, whether you play it with the trees catching people or passing the apple, whatever you want to do for this game. So you have all of this opportunity for the students to be doing those interludes together. And then you could do a step up where you have a pair meets with a pair and then they find a way to combine them, right? Mm-hmm. Still just using, and it could be just speech. It could be speech with just those two levels of body percussion because we're probably talking about first, maybe second grade, right? Yep. And then from there, we'll talk about level 3 next time. But again, so the idea is we have our known song, our game that we've been playing. We're taking 2 speech pieces and we're taking those rhythmic building blocks. I'm doing what we talked about at the beginning, I guess. And we're manipulating those to create what could be an ostinati, but is really just an interlude, right? So you can either layer it with the song like we talked about last week, or you can separate it out for the students to have more choice, and then they're using different levels of body percussion. Maybe they're collaborating with another group, but we're always going back to that refrain, right? Mm-hmm. So it's what's nice about that, what's nice about building, that classroom style rondo is that everybody still has a job. Yes. So even if the students are playing the game, the kids who are getting ready to do their ostinato or their interlude are getting ready to do their interlude, so they're engaged in their thinking, and the kids who are playing the game want to play the game, and then they're listening so they know when to come back in for the game. So it works in a really, really beautiful way with pacing as well, right? Because it's like when that, if your apple knocks me out, it's that next person's turn to go, and we're just going and going along, and no matter what happens, and then we're going to keep going, and then we can talk about it afterwards, right? I just hit myself in the face. That's fine. So whatever. So that is kind of the next level I would go to.
Yeah, so the easiest thing in the world, like if you are kind of low on ideas for what to teach tomorrow, take anything and make it a rondo. Anything and turn it into a rondo is like instant magic, because it takes this tiny little song, Apple Tree, and it expands it. And this is something that you can do at an Informants, and this is something that you can do at any sort of like PTA, any sort of like community presentation. This is perfect because look at how much stuff you can tie into it. Something that will trip people up, because not people as in like my hand is up with this as well. Something that will trip me up and my students up is in the rondo, in order for me to be ready to play apple, apple, tree, tree in my pairing with my body percussion, I need to be ready as soon as knock me out. I need to be ready. So can you talk about any sort of coaching that you do or anything in the moment that you are doing to help students so that you keep the momentum, right? Because the magic of this is the momentum.
Yeah, so part of it is a little bit of playing conductor, right?
Yep.
So being over with the kids, like trying to help keep the steady beat as they're playing the passing game. Let's say they're playing the passing game. And then if your apple knocks me out, and then as that's happening, if your apple knocks me out, like you're giving eye contact, you're giving them that cue so that they're ready to go. And kids are going to miss the cue. So if that happens, then ready, set, and here you go. Another minute, ready, bum, 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 here you go. You're like as much as they need to get ready to go. And then same thing going back to the game, you might just need a quick like kind of song starter, right, to get them back into that next section.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that's a more effective way to keep the pacing up as opposed to being like, it's okay. All right, are you ready? Okay, you got it now? Okay, here we go. Just don't give them the chance to think about it. And then there's a little bit of urgency, not like negative peer pressure, but a little bit of urgency to keep things moving along. The other thing that I would do is like you said, give a little bit of that like class train wreck or group practice where it's like, okay, this half of the class is going to sing the song. When they're done, everybody is going to do their interlude at the same time. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. It's going to sound like a mismatch. I mean, I'll have a steady beat, but just practice it and then go back so they get kind of that ABA feeling and then switch and have the other class do it as well before it's like time for like the big show, right?
Yeah.
So I think that those two things, the practice, those three things rather, the practice, the kind of doing that conducting, if you will, and then the third thing of being ready to throw in that just like impromptu interlude. And maybe you do it with a recorder. Maybe you're just like, maybe you just automatically do your own little like recorder thing in between each of the things or something. I don't know. So it just gives them a little bit more time musically speaking.
Yes. And so the big thing that you said there is that the momentum stays in, even if you're giving students a cue, it's going to be a metric cue. If your apples knock me out, they don't play anything, right? And then you say, ready, set, and here you go. But you are always there and like you have the pulse so you can keep everything going. And then the thing that I would yes and with your conducting thing, well, two things to kind of yes and. With when you talk about conducting, a lot of that is also going to come to your physical presence in the classroom. That when you say you're conducting, we do not mean that Anne is in the front of the classroom giving people like a breath and you just stay up there, right? You're walking around, right? So as they're finishing up the game behind you, you have walked over to that group that is about to come in. And as they're finishing the game, you are speaking to them, here you go, right? And then once they're good, you have walked back over to the circle and you're helping them come in kind of while it's happening. So, so it is conducting, but it's also like you are the needle in a thread and you're just like moving around, tying everything together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I'm in everybody's face. Like,
yes.
Right.
Yeah. You're like their shoulder angel, just like helping them come in all the time. Yes. Yes, exactly. So kids stay the same. Like the kids don't move unless you're doing the circle game, like with the, like the London Bridge style, but the teacher is up and down and around. Like it's very active for the teacher. And then the other thing that I want to highlight in this activity is that it is imperative that the kids can sing the song and play the game without your help. And that they're not relying on you to sing the song with them. And that there is some sort of agency of like, we know when to start the game. And it can happen with help from Anne, but we can do it basically on our own. And so when we talk about singing songs and playing games, that is like the most important piece of our classrooms. Number one, because it's fun. Number two, everything else builds on the song and the game.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So what I love about both of our activities is we're not changing the actual like steady beat.
Yes.
Is the skill or is the concept that you were using. And for me, it's ta and toddy or ta and tt, right? And so we're not making that more complicated. We're just asking for like a higher level of student creativity, higher level of student choice, more options for what they can actually do with the thing in terms of like, is it speech? Is it singing? Is it body percussion? How are you going to manipulate the rocks to show the steady beat? And so from that standpoint, this is actually like a very student arranging heavy deal, right? And this kind of goes back to your conversation about like, what's the role of the teacher, what's the role of the student in this adventure of arranging that we're doing. That's all game based and play based, right?
Yes.
It's not like, okay, now it's time to sit down and we are going to learn this arrangement of apple tree. Like, it's time for them, like, you have all the parameters in place, but you don't know what the students are going to come up with.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Okay, I think we have set ourselves up well for level 3.
Yes, ma'am. You even did a little bit of foreshadowing, so everybody just buckle up.
Ooh, just buckle up. Exciting.